In war, we always think of those directly involved in the fighting. But there is another band of fighters, children and their mums and the elderly. The Second World War in England forced the evacuation of thousands of children from the cities to the country. This short video is from a talk given by Barry Browne to a large audience of aged care residents. Barry himself, a resident, recounts his life as one of those evacuated children from when he left the smog, noise and industry of the city to find himself with his brother, sister and mother to a small village outside Norwich, Kirby Bedon. Barry, aged just over 5 then, may have been removed from the frying pan, but only to land on hot coals, as his experiences proved as he recounted those crystal clear memories of more than 75 years. And here is the point. This is all important social history. Battle plans and campaigns, bravery, atrocities, ordinary people trying to just survive. It needs to be recorded.
But I remember going to school, and it was quite strange for me because I'd never been to school before, and I met all these new people, and you tended to forget things and things like that. But my real first memory was of my father bringing me home on leave a German helmet, which I kept at home. And I went to school one day. I'd never seen a banana. I'd never eaten a banana. I actually knew what they were. But what he decided to do at 5 years of age, he swapped the banana with me for the tin helmet. And I thought that was a hell of a catch, a banana. So, but it was a long way for a guy like me to sit in class and have that banana in the drawer. And I kept opening up and looking at it, and I peeled it a little bit, and I ate a little bit, and by the end of the afternoon there was about that much left, and I was to take it home for my brother and sister. They hardly got a bite, but that was my first introduction to bananas. And Christmas time for us there, everything was on ration, meat, butter, you only got a little amount. So I had to learn what to do, and so by that stage I'd got to about 7, 8 or 9, somewhere about that, and I had a dog. And sort of living out in the country like that, what I used to do at night, I learned very early what to do. I used to go out rabbiting, and what I'd do, I'd put snares in the fence, send my dog out, this is 8 or 9 years of age, send the dog out into the paddock, he'd run them into the snares and I'd take them home and Mum would do them, all that sort of thing. And I used to love being out at night. I got to about 9 or 10, something like that. And it was an absolutely beautiful thing for me to get the dog. Mum never worried about me because there was nobody around, nobody would get me. And I used to go up the fields, we used to catch rats and all sorts of things. We didn't eat the rats, but the dog, he loved killing rats. But I went up there one night and there was another farm, and I thought, well, I'll go up and see if there's anything on there. And I went to go in, and there's an old fellow sitting there on a bale of hay. And he said, what are you up to, boy? And I said, look, I'm trying to get some rabbits and things like that. And we talked for a while, probably an hour, hour and a half. And he said, well, I better teach you. And he was an old Norfolk poacher, and poachers in those days were fellas that used to go out, and the gentry owned all the land, and they had pheasants and partridges and all those sorts of things there. So they had the gamekeepers to look after them. So this old fellow taught me everything. I'll try and explain it to you. He taught me how to gate net. Hares, not as I see them here now and I see them there, were out they used to be out in the field, but they'd always make for a fence. So he had these nets that he put up over the fence, sent the dog out, and the dog would run the hares into, for a boy of 9 or 10 or something like this, a hare came through and with the net, and you jump on it, you get scratched, but he didn't care. But he then taught me all the other things, which were getting the pheasants out of the trees and all these sorts of things. And it was quite a life, it really was. And so that probably was the first part. But the Germans started to bomb, and we living right out where we did, the Germans would, what they didn't do in the early stages of the war, they didn't bomb in thousands of bombers and things like that. One used to sneak over and drop bombs on Norwich. A few nights later, he'd drop bombs on other places. The reasons for that is that the English built places out in the country that looked like a city, and they built a aerodrome. There was an aerodrome. They had wooden planes on it, and they had all sorts of things to confuse, but there were a lot of these. It was to confuse the Germans. If they came over, they'd light them, and they'd think they were the bombers burning up and all this sort of thing. But in actual fact, they weren't. So, they played nip and tuck with each other and all that sort of thing. A little later in the war, they got very cruel. I don't know whether the English ever did it, but what they do, there was one particular bomber, aeroplane, 2-engine, very quick, and he was obviously a specialist, because what he'd do, he'd fly over at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when everybody was coming out of the factories, the kids were coming out of school and all that sort of thing, and he'd fly down the street and machine gun. It was only to frighten people and to put a lot of misery in them, so they get really worried. The people used to run for shelter. They build these shelters, and the people would run down there. And then one night they actually dropped a bomb and it landed right on it and killed 75 people. So, I sort of watched this all happening, and we used to go to school in the mornings, and that German guy, he's very smart. He lasted a long while. He used to fly, and he'd go to one city one day, one other city the other, and they never knew where he was, and the Spitfires couldn't catch him, the English Spitfires couldn't catch him coming in over the coast, because they didn't know where he was. Later in the war, they got a little bit smarter. They got radar for a start, and with radar, you used to be able to see them coming in. And I worked in a radar station in England when I did my 3 years national service, and so that then got a little bit easier. Being so far in the country, you wouldn't think that you would be involved with stuff as much as we were, because this fellow would come in the afternoon, and of course he'd come in the shortest way, which was over our 4 little houses in, and the Spitfires caught up with him, and they were fighting over the house, and they were shooting and all this sort of thing, and the bullets were actually falling down around us and went through the shed roofs and all that sort of thing. So it was a pretty scary old time. It sort of wore on from there, and most afternoons you'd catch planes over our house fighting, and as the war went on, they used to come in, thousands of them, they'd fly in, and like where we were, there were 47 aerodromes in that little area, which meant there were a lot of aeroplanes there. So, as I said, the Americans would fly out in the morning. They'd go out at about 9 or 10 o'clock. Us kids would be going to school, and you'd see them all coming up and flying off and things like that. And there were obviously Polish pilots and pilots from other parts of the world that had come over to fight with the English. They went out in the mornings, and we used to walk to school and see them. Then it sort of got to the stage of coming back in the afternoon around about 4 o'clock, 4 p.m., 3:30, 4 o'clock. And us kids would all be out in the harvest fields where they were cutting the corn, where we try and catch the rabbits. And you'd watch them, they'd come in, thousands of them, and they'd be firing different types of lights. Red, we've got dead on board. This one, we're running out of petrol, and all these different coloured lights. And so we were watching these one particular afternoon, and all of a sudden one just came straight down in the field next door to us. And he'd run out of petrol, but all I saw was him sliding across the field, and saw 3 or 4 fellas fall out of the plane and all that sort of thing. 4 died, there were, and so that was sort of a normal afternoon for us, not so much having planes crash, but having them coming in, going out, and all. The stage where they had these huge radar masts. I don't know if you know, they're huge poles. They had the big ones, and out of our window you could see 4 of them. And when I got up, or we all got up one morning and had a look out, one of them was gone. And an aeroplane, an American aeroplane, had come back in, didn't see it, flew straight in it and crashed. And I could remember looking there, and on one of the other ones was a flying jacket. So there were a number of people killed there, but that was sort of the war. That's what it was. It was a case of them coming over, bombing us, and them us going there. But I think what really happened, it was a case early in the war of the 2 countries having a bit of an understanding. We won't bomb cities where people are, and we won't do that sort of thing. They tried to bomb the aerodromes, or the places that were, such what they did too. They built not only those aerodromes I was telling you about, they actually built bridges and fire so that they'd bomb them instead of going on to Norwich. But it didn't work after a while, because actually what happened, and it was a bit of a shame, the Germans bombed a city and they killed thousands of people. So what did the British do the next day? Got in their planes, went over and bombed their city. So that was really when the war started to hit people like us and just the normal people. They didn't have a lot of gentleness about them as the war went on. One of the fellas next door to us, we dug a huge hole, and I mean it was huge, and we put an old garage in it, and we used to go up there, but then it got too much, running out when the planes came over at night. And so what my mother did, she had the table reinforced, and us kids used to sleep under the table, and I can remember, I'll go back to the thing in the ground. I can remember sitting there one night and a plane just whizzed over, and I don't know where it went. But they obviously had radar then, so they could see okay. But it's frightening, it's very frightening. And it's also frightening when you're sitting in your house and us under the table, and a plane actually knocked our chimney off miles from anywhere. And, the chimney came down and all that sort of thing. But it was the fright, it was the worry. You'd be walking to school in the morning and the Spitfires would come tearing across the fields, chasing the German aeroplanes. And so we had a bit of a, it was a bit of a nasty old time.
Shelter much more comfortable. Wooden bunks can easily be made and fitted so that 6 people can sleep comfortably. Cover the frame with wire mesh and bend the ends of the wire at right angles. There's plenty of wire mesh available now. Hammer it into the wood. No nails or staples needed, but hammer them straight, not as father is doing. You see here how the bunks are fitted into the shelter. For covering, sleeping bags are best. Don't forget...
Mum used to go on as though nothing was going on, but we had a hell of a fright one night because she was making some jam on the fire, and my 2 sisters, my father had sent them one bag for the eldest one, a handbag, and they were fighting with each other, and the poor little girl sat in all this jam and things like that. They had to cart her off to the hospital next morning. No ambulances, no nothing like that. They had to put her on the bus and take her and put her into hospital. So things were fairly primitive at times, but that, you sort of got over that. But there were things that used to happen, like the Germans had been captured and they were working on the fields, pulling up sugar beet, doing all that sort of thing. So what they did, they used to come over to my mum and ask if they could borrow a bath so they could take it back and make alcohol out of it. So they made my kids, or my brother and sister, they made them little wooden toys. But my elder sister, she would have nothing to do with them. She was only about 7 or 8. They were the enemy. But that's a daughter. We didn't think like that. It did get worse. It got a lot worse than that, because the Germans got a V1 and a V2, which was one was a bomber, which had nobody in it. It just had a fire coming out of the back, and it used to fly. It used to fly over over from Germany, France, over there, and sometimes they would come straight. The light would go out and they'd come straight down, or another time the light would go out and they would just glide across to a few hundred miles. It just depended. The little boy next door, please, I'm going to say a swear word here, he was only 6. What happened, he used to come running in to get under the table with us, and I heard him running, and he said, Miss Browne, let me in, the bloody light's gone out. Because the light went out and he thought it was going to crash. So they're good, they're memories that I've got. And then the V2s, which were the big rockets that they sent up, and they used to come over, and of course they were aiming for a city or the aerodromes or anything like that, but they were very primitive in the early days, because they didn't really know what they would do, how far they would go. Us kids, 4 or 5 of us, were all down under a chestnut tree, which came down in a little bank like that, and the chestnut tree was beneath it. And we were under there getting chestnuts, and the next thing, everything, it just blew up. It had crashed in the field behind the thing. It just went everywhere, and all I can remember looking out, seeing in the field in front of me, was a shrapnel and lumps going up and all that sort of thing. Well, running home, my mum come running down, and I tell you what, I wasn't very brave that day, I can promise you. It's very frightening. The war sort of developed on, and it got worse, and then Norwich, I can remember looking out the window in the morning when there were when it was just getting light, because at night, if you opened a chink in your curtain, the old air raid warden would come round and bang on your window and say, you're showing a light, you're showing a light. And, they would be minuscule. But I can remember looking out and seeing Norwich all on fire and going in the next morning and having a look. They made a hell of a mess of Norwich, they really did. I think it was probably one of the heaviest bombed cities in England at the point, because it had so much going for it in the way that it was building everything and doing everything, so they really wanted to get rid of that. After the war, I thought, I've got a heck of a lot that I can interest you in, and if anybody wants to leave, please, that doesn't matter. What happened was a journalist, 15 years after the war, was driving out to Kirby Bedon, where these two churches were, my church and the one we went to and the one that was broken down. And he was driving past, and it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and all of a sudden he had to stop. He was petrified. He heard noises, he heard bombs dropping, and they've tried to work it out since whether he was fully, but when they worked out, that actual moment was 3 o'clock in the afternoon when this other bomber dropped in the field the other side. So if you believe in some things, that was something that happened. But I can remember the 4 Americans that were killed in the bomber that crashed in the field near us. We were in the choir, my brothers and sisters and I. We went to the church and they put a big plaque up in the church, and they brought the other Americans. There was the co-pilot and a few others, and they were in the church as well. And when I looked at the boy that was the pilot, 19 years of age, and he didn't look like anything like a 17-year-old friend of mine that was in the choir. But and what's happened, my sister, excuse me, I've got a sore throat. My sister got in touch with him. She found out where he was, got in touch with him. And every year they have a reunion in the Kirby Bedon Hall. And that, initially, before the pilot died, he used to come every year. And they've made a big thing of that, because now the children come, and it's the last week in every September. So there's still a relationship between, the people that were involved there. And the German plane machine gunned the house where I was running in, and I can remember that as clear as anything. And the bullets ran along the front of the wall. So I was a bit lucky to get away with it, actually. But it wasn't the most.
How old were you then?
How old would I have been then? About 10 or 11, something like that.
You don't realise how bad it is and how serious.
No, you don't. Until at the time you were scared and you tried to get out of the way, or like going to school in the morning, if the Spitfires came over very low, and we used to lay on the ground up beside the bank. So that became normal. And if we were playing sport out on the field, and all of a sudden there was one of these big bangs where one of these rockets or things had gone down, we were taught to always lay flat on the ground and things like that. So, but it upset my father more than anyone. I don't think he ever recovered from the war. He came back and had all the treatment, had all the electric shocks and all that, but he died because it was just too much for him. I don't think he could put up with it anymore, but I think there are a lot of people like that, though. I think a lot of Australians that went to war, I mean, they fought alongside the British, and but you only see now, the Vietnam War, how much these fellows are suffering at the present point in time. I don't think after the war, the World War II, that there were as much of the soldiers themselves being derelict and on the street, because that's there now. Out of this Vietnam War and these other wars that they've had, we seem to have hundreds of soldiers and people that are, just can't get over it. It's a terrible shame.
Oh, yes, it'd be dreadful.
Pardon?
It must have been terrifying for you and for the children.
I had a cousin, a young cousin. She would have been a couple of years older than me. She came up and stayed with us because London did get pounded a lot. And she was the bravest little girl that I've ever met. And I remember when that bomb crashed in the field, I wanted to get out of there. And she was dragging my baby little sister with her, and Mum came down. But you never really ever get over it. You never totally forget it. And I still have dreams about it at times. I do. And the dreams are not always akin to somebody fighting me from the war, but it can be somebody throwing a rock at you and all that sort of thing, and that then takes you back to what was happening there. It was a horrible war when it got past the stage of bombing aerodromes and places that the army, for both the Germans and us as well, and then when you started to bomb cities and coming down the street and machine gunning and killing kids and people, that was when it got really nasty. And we saw it, we heard it, and but it got. I'm so glad. I worry about a war now. I really do, because I don't think it'll be something that will. It won't be as easy as World War II. There won't be two sides fighting each other. They'll be dropping bombs. There'll be all sorts of things, and I think everyone will join in. So I just hope it never starts again. And there were things that happened, like Mum used to take us for a walk on a Sunday afternoon. There'd be my baby sister in the pram, there would be my elder sister and myself and my brother. And we would we'd walk down to a place called the Bramerton Woods End. It was a hotel, nobody went in, but all the boats, if there were any boats, they used to pull up there. But they wouldn't let them then, because what they used to do across the river in front of the hotel was the English used to practice going across rivers, and they put the tanks and things on a float and floating it across the river. And I can remember one afternoon, one toppled off with all the men in it and just sung, and we were standing there watching it, because we were only kids. We didn't know any better. And I think there were 4 or 5 drowned in that. But that's the horrors of war, isn't it? The horrors of it all.
Just another job done. The first of the day's deliveries is just coming in. Landing instructions are given by radio telephone, and a Liberator makes its graceful arrival at the terminal airport.